opportunity to ask everyone, how are you? Any questions or feedback between the last meeting and this meeting? Okay, well, please speak up as we go and feel free to, if you need some clarification on something, ask. If you have some added value to anything that I'm presenting, please, this is a very collaborative initiative. So today we'll be talking about drafting strategies. Our agenda is on the left. The objectives today are understanding the various inputs, so the tools and technical resources, existing plans, etc. that are, oh, Joe, do you have a question with your hand up? No, I think he's talking. Okay. So understanding all these inputs, I'm going to be going through a lot of information. And then we're going to start drafting equitable climate action and resilient strategies. So really want to make sure that you're understanding that I'm being succinct enough when I explain things to you that you get it, but I also want to encourage any conversation if you need more of an explanation. So because this is going to be, these strategies, we have tons and tons of ideas about how to get to net zero, right? And not everyone's going to agree on every strategy. So we really are aiming for consensus. We want you to truly consider, can I live with this? And be listening, certainly representing your standpoint, your perspective, your area of expertise, but also listening and doing our best to, like I said, arrive at that consensus, or I can live with that idea. So our draft structure we went over last week. These are the questions if you wanted to revisit kind of the sections of the draft structure. These are the categories and the questions that each one is getting at. Our goals we went over last week, our climate action goals and our climate resilience goals. Our vision, certainly, our vision of this whole plan, it is important to keep revisiting that all Richmonders, regardless of their identity or neighborhood, thrive in a climate resilient and climate neutral community. And those guiding principles are that we have balanced well-being, local ecosystems, and economic vitality, that everyone has equitable access to the resources that are clean, sustainable, and affordable. Everyone has the ability and the resources to take ownership of this plan, and that we're leading with race in our work to transform the systems that are impacting all historically disenfranchised communities. So that vision really is at the heart of this planning process. The community priorities were what we heard when we went into the listening sessions with those frontline communities. Brianne is going to talk about those a little later. The revised pathways that we went over last week, you guys are obviously buildings and energy pathway with that kind of tagline or mission statement to accelerate the equitable transition to healthy, resilient, climate neutral buildings and energy sources. And you can see that Waste decided to call themselves Waste Reduction and Recovery, with a new tagline that says fostering sustainable methods of waste reduction, wasting less, reusing more toward a zero waste community, and that transportation added mobility to their pathway with that goal to accelerate the transition for all to clean and equitable mobility systems. So each group, just like you did, went over their pathway and really kind of arrived at consensus on their mission. So the objectives that we talked about last week, got all of your great feedback. We left those slides open so that people could continue to revisit them, add stars, prioritize. This went through the community working group for kind of an extra lens. And these are the 4 objectives that we landed on. So for buildings and energy, objective 1, achieve climate neutrality and increase resilience in government buildings, infrastructure, and operations. Objective 2 is maximize energy efficiency, performance, and resilience in all existing buildings. Objective 3 is ensure all Richmonders have equitable access to affordable and resilient renewable energy. And Objective 4 is achieve climate neutrality and maximize resilience in all new buildings. So we'll get to, we'll revisit all of that with the strategies underneath in our breakout activity. But first, want to kind of get to where we are today. So again, refining those objectives. Those are the long-term aims we want to accomplish, organized into the different pathways. And then we'll be talking about the strategies that fall under each of them. So what are the SMARTY actions that will lead us toward our objectives? So as a reminder, RVAgreen 2050 is at the nexus of equity, climate action, and climate resilience. There are several inputs or tools or technical resources, existing plans, etc., for each element of this process. And many of them we've already worked on or reviewed together. And so we'll be diving deeper into a few of these inputs today so that we can work towards refining our objectives and drafting our strategies. So on strategies, this is what we're asking today. We'll review the inputs for the strategies in the next several slides. One category is technical information, which includes climate and energy modeling and the climate vulnerability and risk assessment that we worked on 2 meetings ago, and Brianna is going to introduce the findings from that to you in a little bit. And then the other category of inputs we're calling policy inputs. These are a group of examples and contextual information to help us think about the possibilities. So that's kind of the language around, where we need to be or what we need to do to get to our goal. So our team has reviewed these inputs and created starting points.
I'm gonna put all those ideas right there for you, Laura.
I'm sorry? Okay.
I think he just accidentally came off mute. You're all right.
Thanks.
You put it back on. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So help keep an eye on chat and things, because I can only see like 5 of you at the moment. So our team has reviewed these inputs and created starting points for drafting strategies within each of our revised objectives, using your ideas from the last meeting and strategies from the Richmond 300 master plan. It's important that we start with the Richmond 300 strategies because this plan was just adopted and it includes many of the things that will help us get to our goals. So as we know, in all organizations, you want to take, the foundations that have already been approved and build on them. And many of you were involved in the Richmond 300 process, so that helps us even more. There was an email that went out on Friday. I'm not sure if many of you had a chance to look, but there was a link to a laundry list in there, and that has all the Richmond 300 strategies that relate to buildings and energy that have both a resilience and a carbon mitigation component to it. And then there are all kinds of peer strategies and others. So hopefully you had a chance to look at that. If not, I urge you to revisit it between this meeting and the next meeting as we refine our strategies. So what we ask you to do today is consider those inputs and brainstorm additional strategies. At this point, we want any and all ideas, but we do want to make sure that at the very least, each strategy that we write down today either reduces greenhouse gas emissions or increases resilience to climate impacts. It could be both. If it doesn't do either, though, it's not going into the plan. Is it equitable? So for today, we'll think in high-level terms about this and then get into more details at the next meeting with a refined list of strategies and the equity screening tool that we worked on back in December. Okay. So the first technical input for buildings and energy strategies is the climate and energy modeling. I briefly introduced you to this at the last meeting. I'm going to go into it a little more this time so you have kind of a better picture of what the modeling looks like. So the GreenLink group has produced dozens of scientific publications investigating policy, economic, and engineering solutions to pressing energy, water, and environmental problems. So their research and advice has helped craft and inform energy and environmental policies and strategies from the local to the international scale. So we're really grateful to have had them involved in this modeling process, bringing us their expertise. So as you can see from this first chart or graph, the current greenhouse gas emissions in Richmond, I showed you this last week. Gasoline is the most, is the tallest. And then those next three, the commercial electricity, natural gas use, and residential electricity, those are our buildings. So together, obviously, buildings does make up the most emissions, but that's broken down into those three categories. And then industrial electricity, diesel, waste, and then other transportation emissions. Excuse me. So this model on the left shows what the business as usual scenario is going to look like between now and 2050. And then on the right is the max scenario, the goal scenario. If we take ambitious action, this is what it'll look like on the right. And you can see that it's broken down between residential, commercial, and industrial electricity and natural gas.
And Dawn, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you click the up arrow below the share button on your Google screen, it'll make the slides a tiny bit bigger. That might help people.
Okay, tell me where I'm. What
Okay, go down. There's a up. Yep, click that.
Okay, is that better?
I mean, it kind of, I don't know. Not really, but just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, I apologize to everyone. Normally we would do this in PowerPoint, but because we have such an interactive breakout, it's built into this presentation. So we're going to be giving you the link directly to these Google slides, and that's where we'll be doing the work. So you'll be able to revisit all of these slides later after we share the link with you. So just so you know, all of this modeling is consistent with Dominion's 2020 Integrated Resource Plan, and it adheres to the Virginia Clean Economy Act's intents and standards, the SCC's prior rulings, and PJM's forecasts. So it really is a solid gauge of the future energy supply for Richmond. And what we see here is that total emissions could fall by 72% given the current construct in Richmond. I.e. what's within our sphere of control and with some influence. Buildings today are by far the biggest source of emissions. So there are lots of unknowns between now and 2050, but it's going to take a lot of work to get to net zero.
Can you explain the precipitous drop off in 2045?
That is when Dominion is net zero.
And it all just happens in 1 year overnight.
Well, it's gradually going down. And then that's the deadline of when, yes, all carbon emissions from our electric sources will disappear.
Just doesn't look like a realistic scenario. But.
Well, given the timelines of what's supposed to happen when, that's what they're working towards. This is what they're regulated to work towards. And so you can see what's left then is basically the natural gas emissions, because all of the electricity will be clean.
So I guess then your model really doesn't have a good input for their Dominion's plan on how they get there over the next 1 or 2 decades.
Well, it really is worked in here, given all of the their plans that have been published to date and their timelines. This tool that they use, the Athena tool that GreenLink modeled this in, incorporates all of those Dominion timelines and legislation and SCC rulings and forecasts. So this is the best gauge.
Yeah, and this is Alicia. It actually, Bob, to your question, it is very detailed. They've done, GreenLink actually worked on the Virginia Clean Economy Act and a lot of the modeling of Dominion's resources and their power generation. And so they took a lot of the work that they did over the last year and even before that with the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and brought it into this project. So what you see on this screen is literally the tippy top of the iceberg of all of the work that they've done. They have actually modeled out on an hourly basis power generation and supply with Dominion. And so we have as much data and information details that anyone would like to see. We're just trying to keep things for today at a pretty high level because we have a lot of different inputs to share with you all on mitigation, resilience, and a little bit on equity. So, but we're happy to share more details with anyone that's interested. And GreenLink is also happy to answer any questions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Bob would love to, everyone keep your questions, because I know that we have so much data, so much modeling that we can find those answers if we don't have them for you today. So this next slide is showing what the electric demand looks like. The business as usual scenario does have a good deal of energy efficiency, and we looked at this last week. We went back and had them kind of redo the slide so it was more obvious where the energy efficiency activity comes in. But so there is a good deal of energy efficiency activity funded by Dominion baked in on the business as usual case on the left. And on average, the business as usual activities will reduce residential and commercial consumption by just under 2% per year. The max case scenario on the right shows the significant opportunities that we have to decrease the electricity demand even further through the strategies that we'll be identifying in this plan. And as I keep saying, buildings are by far the greatest source of emissions. So we have a lot of work ahead of us and a lot of opportunity in that energy efficiency demand. Okay, so this one is the co-benefits of taking ambitious action. Energy efficiency consistently shows job creation year over year, but the biggest job creation is in bill savings. And I think what's really interesting is that through the energy efficiency and the solar work that we're planning here, the greatest advantage is that people will have more money in their pockets, and that spending induces the creation of jobs. They call that the induced job effect. So I think this is just really interesting. Through all of their modeling, they can show you the net jobs that will come out of taking ambitious action. So you can see on the table the types of jobs, the sectors, and the net job years with a total net job gain of 42,483. So lots of great co-benefits. And then this one is the trajectory, the carbon emissions reductions trajectory if we take ambitious action. So based on all of that modeling, this process gives us the ability to see that it's tough work for decades to come in order to get to this level of commitment by the city, but it does show how far we can get on our own and through these establishing partnerships. These wedges, I think what's really telling is, you can kind of see against each other. The gray is the emissions after policies. So obviously that's a lot is going to happen from policies. We have work to do in the end to get us to zero. But the green is the residential energy efficiency and solar. The yellow is the commercial energy efficiency and solar. The blue is avoided gas consumption. The dark blue is avoided diesel consumption. And the green is the natural gas use reduction, and the peach is the waste management. So this just kind of in proportion to each other. I think this one's helpful to show you what those reductions look like through each action wedge. Okay, so another technical input for buildings and energy strategies is the climate vulnerability and risk assessment we worked on together a couple meetings ago. So I'm going to ask Brianne to introduce the results of that work.
Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. And thank you everyone again for all of your input on the climate vulnerability and risk assessment activity that we did again a few weeks ago. These are just like the technical modeling that Dawn just presented, sort of high level results, and we are happy to provide more detailed data on any of this for those who are interested. So just as a reminder, the assessment that we did together is looking at what how climate change impacts both in terms of heat and water threats. So we're thinking about extreme heat, higher average temperatures, extreme precipitation and flooding, in addition to sea level rise, will impact our community. Community meaning our residents, the people in Richmond, our built assets and infrastructure, and our natural resources. So for this group, we split you all into a couple of breakout rooms because there were so many different types of assets to cover. So I, just as a reminder, have provided those lists of assets here. We looked at a set of assets and systems relating to buildings and infrastructure, and then another set related to our energy system. And what you were asked to do and what we incorporated into the assessment is consider 3 elements of vulnerability to climate change, which are sensitivity, adaptive capacity, and consequence. And then when we took that feedback and combined it with detailed information and data that we have on the actual climate threats that we are looking at. So we have detailed data on where Richmond's urban heat islands are. We have information on where our current floodplains are and where we have projected impacts from sea level rise as well. Dawn, you can go to the next slide. So taking all of that together, again, this is high level. I'll start with the group of assets related to our energy system. This, the chart on the left is showing relative priority in terms of vulnerability to heat versus water threats among those assets. So important to note, and we said this in the beginning of the assessment process, this is not scientific. What you can take from this is looking at this list, which of these assets, based on your input as well as the actual climate data, we might want to consider higher priority for drafting resilience strategies. So when it came to the energy assets and systems, we, based on your feedback and the data, it showed that these assets are vulnerable to both heat threats, extreme temperatures, higher average temperatures, as well as water threats, so including flooding and extreme precipitation. They are sort of this similar across those threats, I guess. So this chart here is ranked by the water threats priority, but you can see that the heat threats priority is pretty similar. So what we're seeing in terms of the higher priority assets to address with drafting resilience strategies are things like our electric grid and transmission infrastructure, as well as our fuel distribution and storage infrastructure as well. And then I've included a couple points of specific feedback that we got on different types of assets. And I'll just note that across the board, it seemed like both heat and flooding were threats for many of these things. This slide and the one I'll show next can serve as a reference point. So we can come back to this as you all are thinking about resilience for the energy system. Dawn, you can go to the next slide. And then this is the list of assets, which is a lot, I know. So again, this can be a reference of the assets that were looked at by the folks who were in the buildings and infrastructure breakout groups. As you can see, based on this, there are different sort of extensive threats based on which type of impact you're looking at, whether that's heat or water or flooding. But generally, the assets that we're looking at that may be higher priority, again, for thinking about drafting strategies are things like housing, built infrastructure, such as the sewer treatment plant, and then critical sort of government and community assets like schools, social services, and public safety buildings. A couple of notes here in terms of general feedback that we got for this is that a lot of the actual vulnerability kind of assessment can come down to location specifics. So whether an individual building or asset is within a floodplain. So for some of these where there are a lot of assets within one category, for example, city buildings, one strategy might be to do a more detailed assessment maybe of where all of those assets are, which ones are in floodplains, in high heat areas. So this is just looking, again, high level at potential threats. And then some of the more specific feedback we got, really it seemed like water threats and particularly flooding was more of a concern than heat when it came to buildings and infrastructure, which is not quite surprising. So again, we can come back to this information as we jump into drafting strategies, but that's a high level overview. Any questions at this point?
Brianne, I have a quick question just about the interrelationships of things. Like, so we're focusing on building and energy, and you had mentioned flooding, which makes perfect sense. But there's a water group looking at those as where's our boundaries, if that's answerable. And when we're thinking about buildings and energy, should we be focusing on a certain part of that, or are we thinking more holistically?
Yeah, great question. And it's one that we have also recently asked ourselves. So I don't have a full sort of complete answer, but I will say that yes, we do have other working groups that are looking at other types of assets and systems when it comes to vulnerability, but also when it comes to drafting strategies. One of the other working groups is the Environment Working Group. That group, however, is focusing more on what I'll say are impacts to the natural environment because of climate change, and also how the natural environment can help us become more resilient to climate change, which certainly relates to buildings and infrastructure when we think about, well, you know, if we increase the tree canopy around a development, that will decrease its urban heat island impact and reduce potentially the impacts of flooding. I am not sure yet where we are going to draw the specific boundary, but I think when we're thinking about it for the purposes of today's exercise, if you all concentrate on from a buildings and for that kind of example, from a buildings and development perspective, what types of policies and programs might be helpful to make those assets more resilient, then we can eventually combine anything that sort of comes out of the environment group as well that seems to be maybe more buildings or infrastructure focused. But at this point, I mean, anyone else from my team who wants to chime in here would be super helpful.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think you
I
did a
saw a
great job.
thumbs up from Alicia. So at this point, just give us all your ideas and we will figure out the boundaries as we go. So that's as best I have, Rob.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey,
Any
this
other
is Joe. I think, is this maybe a typo in the third bullet? Since the water treatment plants are on the river, we plan for floods, but chronic and acute. Should that be both?
Probably, yeah, I think so.
It doesn't make sense the way it's written. The one comment I have on the, we're dealing with this very thing right now, but with the green canopy, that helps buildings stay cool, but when you have storms, it can create building damage. So something to be aware of.
Yes, definitely. And we'll be talking more about that later. That I think is an example of something where we see the interconnection between the desire to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase resilience, and that's something we definitely want to think about.
And then this may have been addressed with another group, but I thought I heard you say they were looking at, like, there is vulnerability to vegetation and trees. Is that accounted for somewhere else?
Yes, so that was one of the assets and systems looked at by
Okay.
our environment working group.
Good, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
And
Trustee-
Michael has a hand raised. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if this is slightly off topic, but as you were going through the earlier slides, it really bothered me to see this phrase max, scenario, because we have to do better than that. And I do believe that as things improve, we're gonna do better than that. I mean, maybe that's my, optimism that's unfounded, but I wonder if we might present those without the word max, or, increased effort or something that's not max, because we have to do much. This whole idea of RVAgreen 2050 is unacceptable. We have to get there quicker. And I believe we will, because I think, we're just starting to turn the tide in public opinion, and, the prices and storage capacity and other factors are improving faster than predicted. So it's not max, isn't it? Isn't.
Those are great points. And that word max came from the modeling team. So they're looking at numbers. They're saying, given the current constructs, this is the max that we can see, based on what we know today. But absolutely. And if that's, maybe we can come up with a better word. I agree with you. But we have a lot of work to do for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, just to add on to what Dawn's saying, this is a good point in time to reiterate as well that the modeling approach that GreenLink took is also just modeling what was in the cities considered in sort of our sphere of control and maybe very likely to influence. Again, at this point in time, because we're really looking at sort of a 5 to maybe 7 year planning timeline for this current process of strategies that we're going to develop to implement. And so we didn't include things that, there may very well be other things that happen at, a state or policy or a federal level that add to our emissions reductions, but those things weren't included in the modeling. So just as a reminder to everyone.
Yeah, and the fact that we're revisiting this every 5 years is really important. So hopefully, we'll see that max case and those numbers jump each 5 years. So the next slide goes over the community priorities, and I was going to ask Brianne to kind of revisit these for our group since we have her with us. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So just as a reminder, as part of the RVAgreen 2050 structure and what we are keeping in the back of our minds throughout this whole process is that we want to make this plan, the goals of which are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase resilience in an equitable way, relevant for the community. So for many people, that means not talking about greenhouse gas emissions and instead talking about what they actually care about and what their sort of day-to-day priorities are. These priorities we gathered during the community listening process that we undertook last summer. We were focusing on communities that are on the front lines of climate change, that are also historically disadvantaged when it comes to many inequities, different factors, particularly race influencing those. I'll put a link in the chat to our website, which you all have, I think, gotten before. But if you'd like more information on the process and to gather the community priorities and what each one means, you can check that out. we will be diving more into this in detail when we, at our next meetings, when we start to refine strategies and apply the equity tool that we worked on a few meetings ago now. But just suffice it to say, I think there are connections to be drawn between the areas that you all are working on in buildings and energy, particularly around affordable housing, beautiful and safe neighborhoods, physical and mental well-being, as well as jobs and economic development. And so we want those, keep those things in mind as you're drafting strategies and thinking about how to make them equitable and relevant for our community.
Does anyone have any questions while we have her with us on those community priorities or the risk assessment? Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to jump back into some of the other inputs as we start developing strategies. The GreenLink policy toolkit has lots of examples, and the way we're looking at this, these are the type of policies that GreenLink experts have seen as most effective in reducing carbon emissions in other cities. So that's why we're kind of pulling these out. These are the kinds of things that we'll be modeling and trying to integrate into those actions. The next input bucket are these climate action plan strategy examples from other cities. Last week when we were drafting objectives, you saw some of these as examples on that laundry list that we sent to you on Friday. You'll see all of the ones that we pulled out as relevant to buildings and energy and our 4 objectives. So these are just some of them from other cities that can be looked at. And then Richmond 300 goals and objectives. So those are a starting point for drafting strategies. Like we said earlier, the ideas that you came up with at the last meeting are a starting point. So together between Richmond 300 and what you've come up with so far, this is where we're starting, and we want to build on that. So last time, this is what it's going to look like when we go into our activity. Just a few slides. They're in the green. These are what you and your fellow teammates came up with as draft strategies. And just kind of revisiting, that was a lot of inputs that we just went over. So we'll help you remember and consider all of those as we start the drafting process together. But we do want to take a look at what we've been working on internally to get you started. So we've been mentioning this RVAgreen 2050 Nexus. And as a reminder, at the very least, we're only looking at strategies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and or increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. So ideally, we're going to come up with the strategies that do both, but that might not be possible for all. So we want to make sure that we are, for example, not coming up with strategies that might decrease emissions, but also decrease resilience. And I think Joe came up with a good one of the trees. We want tree canopy, but if that's going to make a building less resilient, we need to consider those impacts. So this graph just kind of shows you how on the emissions, you need to make sure that there might be a high greenhouse gas emissions, but there's maladaptation if the measures that increase resilience but increase emissions at the same time, or if they decrease emissions but have no impact on or reduce resilience. So these are just some examples. Distributing energy supply across multiple renewable sources, improving efficiency of water distribution. We'll want to be thinking about others that kind of meet up in this equity synergy bubble, measures that reduce the risk and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So any questions on this?
Yes, I have a question. Well, actually, I guess I have 2. I'm just trying to figure out, so this sounds like a really good process, good strategy, but who will be identifying whether the strategies increase resilience and equity.
Well, I think it's a group effort. I think that we're all, doing this together. We're bringing a big brain trust together. Everyone has a different area of expertise, so we certainly want to be considering all of those potential co-benefits and impacts and, scenarios that one of us might not necessarily think of.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and Arena, just to add on to what Dawn's saying, so once we do this working group does this initial sort of drafting strategy exercise today, and all of the other working groups are going to be going through the same exercise, and then essentially our team, our staff will be going back through, and we're going to be screening for if something didn't isn't meeting one of those criteria, and then bringing all of those strategies back for you all next time. And if it's helpful, and you'll be getting into this a little bit today, but the next step in the process is going to be prioritizing and the strategies to then apply the equity screening tool, because we know that we don't want to have, for example, 25 strategies under each objective, knowing we have 4 objectives in this working group to then apply an equity screening tool. So ultimately, it's a collaborative effort of our team going back through behind you all and looking and working with, for example, GreenLink on the mitigation side, and our other resources if necessary from the resilience standpoint. And then bringing these back to you all next time around. And that's why, that sweet spot up in the upper right-hand quadrant is ultimately where we'd like to get all of our strategies to be, but we don't want to ask, this is more of a brainstorming session today. So we're not, we don't want to ask folks to rule anything out right away, but that's where we're heading, if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, it is. Just knowing that we will be able to, once your team has kind of sorted everything, we'll be able to revisit, because the person at the beginning of the call that mentioned the issue with trees close to buildings, yes, they provide shade, they help with stormwater, but also they can damage buildings, they can damage power lines, thinking about so to increase, to make our transmission infrastructure more resilient, and to make way for larger trees, you could bury power lines. But I guess that's just such like a multifaceted issue that it's going to be difficult to sort. But yeah, hearing that you'll be bringing that back to us next time makes me happy. So thank you.
Yeah, and so not to go too far in the weeds on that one, but I think that brings up an interesting point, because in Richmond 300, there is language about burying power lines. And
Yeah.
so, once we start looking at all of these different strategies and we can kind of build them and group them, I think, it'll be interesting to see where we end up.
And you might have co-benefits that, maybe your co-benefits are resilience and something else. You could have, a wide variety of co-benefits that would still make some of these strategies worthwhile.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the activity today, I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll take a 5-minute break before we go into these breakout rooms. It's going to be very similar to last week. We're going to divide up into 4 groups. We have 4 facilitators. I'll be sticking with objective 1. David is objective 2. Irina is objective 3, and Wendy is objective 4. And the facilitators are going to be jumping between the rooms every 15 minutes. So within each objective, Wendy's going to put the link to this slide deck in the chat so that you can open this up with me. And I'll just show you what that looks like. But before I show you this slide, within each objective, there are going to be some strategy buckets. So as we went through the Richmond 300 strategies and as we went through your feedback, we kind of found that they naturally broke up into some different categories within your objectives. So each objective has maybe 3 or 4 slides under them. So you really don't have a whole lot of time to go through it and have a lot of conversation and feedback on any one slide. So take your time to read through it, and like I said, you're going to have about anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes per bucket per slide before you might want to move on to the next, because you have 15 minutes under each total objective. This will make more sense to you when you actually look at the slides. But this is what they look like. So, for example, Objective 1, achieve climate neutrality and increase resilience in government buildings, infrastructure, and operations. The first strategy bucket is energy efficiency. So within this objective, this page of Post-its is focusing on strategies related to energy efficiency in government buildings and infrastructure and operations. So the blue slides, Post-its, were taken from Richmond 300. Those have already been approved. Those are part of the city's master plan. So we want to incorporate those into our strategies. Maybe we need to build on them. Maybe they're not relevant, and in which case you could drag an X over, because we do want to really focus on the high priorities. But the green stickies are the ones from last time. This was something that one or several of you put and starred on a post at the last meeting when we were drafting objectives and asking for the beginning of our strategy brainstorming. So as you read through this, the task is to consider, is this reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Is it increasing resilience? Is it equitable? So if it doesn't follow the rules, don't write it down. If there are strategies missing, you have other ideas that you would like to include on this, go ahead and type those strategies on these the yellow Post-its. And then down below, in the additional feedback, is where you can add more language if you feel like these strategies are good, but you have ideas to make them better. Go ahead and put whatever feedback you want in the bottom. We will capture that. The stars are, obviously it helps us to prioritize what you like. So drag stars to what others are adding. And this is going to be the same as last week, where we're building. Each time you switch between the groups, you're going to see the previous team's comments. So, and then the X's are if you just really don't like it. We're not ruling anything out at this point, but we do want to get a sense of where the priorities are. So that is the activity. Like I said, you'll have a facilitator in each breakout that can, kind of go over this again if you have questions. But before we go into our 5-minute break, anything you want to ask while we're in the big group? Okay, well, with that, it's 11:48. At 11:53, you'll be zoomed into your breakout room, and I'll see you in one of those sessions, and then I'll see everyone in an hour.
Can I ask you just a real quick question?
Sure.
The GHG breakdown had, I think it was commercial electricity, residential, and industrial.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any thoughts are we looking at those all as one big bucket when we're looking, sorry, I'm using the word bucket, but for the objectives, are we looking at all of those? Or is there an area of focus?
So that's a great question. Under Objective 2, maximize energy efficiency, performance, and resilience in all existing buildings. So the strategy buckets are building code, zoning, and permitting, energy efficiency, financing and incentives, existing building benchmarking and retrofits, and then existing building resilience strategies. So as you think of your specific strategies that are going through your head, decide which slide that might make sense on. I will say in particular, I believe it was on this one, someone did say last time, separate residential from commercial from industrial processes. And
Okay.
we have that modeling that is important because, they're very different. So that's a start, that little post-it. What do we need to add to it? You know, what are your ideas for more specific strategies? And now that we have this one up on the screen, let me just say one more thing. The green post-its with in italics, those are the comments from the community working group. So this is something that they, you know, when they're looking at it through their equity lens and those community priorities, this is the language that they wanted us to consider as we're developing strategies in that area. Okay, so I'm sorry I cut into your break. Let's go ahead and we'll be back in 3 minutes, and Brianne will shoot us into our breakouts. All right, thanks everybody.
Hello.
So I hope you found that useful. I can't tell you, just even just in my objective, looking at the feedback, so helpful. The priorities, the great ideas, so much brainstorming. This is a living document, so please continue to add strategies, add your thoughts to it. There's also, I'm going to put it in the chat, the laundry list that has, oh, I keep putting the wrong thing in the chat. Hold on. So this is what I keep talking about, that laundry list that you can sort it and filter it by objectives, see what's kind of these best practices that GreenLink has come up with and in other cities. So continue to look at that, add comments in column G. This is really your tool to start building ideas off each other, both the slide deck and the laundry list sheet. So we're just about out of time. I'll pull up the presentation and share the last slide, but in the meantime, does anyone want to speak up and kind of share any reflections with the bigger group? If so, feel free to take yourself off mute.
I found myself repeating myself a lot. You know, all these things overlap and relate in so many ways. And to me, the important thing is we have a lot of tools in hand now. We just need to get started.
Absolutely.
And get the funding and support and et cetera to do more. But there is so much we can do right now.
Great. Yeah, great summary statement. And so, you know, that next step is coming up with all of those implementation, you know, activities that we need to be thinking about. How do we actually get this done? These are great ideas, but how do we do it? So be thinking about that. I'll go ahead and share on that slide deck. Slide 50 has strategies that may not fit in these objectives. If there are other things, now that you've gone through this exercise with those 4 objectives and all those buckets, if you think of other things that you think we should be considering with buildings and energy, feel free to jump to this slide in that same slide deck and enter your thoughts on these post-its. In terms of wrap up and next steps, continue adding ideas to those slides until the 22nd. And then we'll be pulling it all together and trying to reorganize it. You're just taking this big brain dump and filtering it down into this manageable process where we're sure to include everyone's ideas, but also prioritize what's going to get us to our goal. Our next meeting is Wednesday, March 3rd, 11 o'clock here, same Zoom link. And for now, I believe that Wendy has put the link to the feedback survey. We're always interested in your feedback, so please, please share your thoughts. And then I want to give you the floor if you have any updates or upcoming events or resources you'd like to share with this community. You can speak up or you can put it in the chat now. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Is there anything that anyone would like to add? I see Michael saying, I agree with Andrew. I think we've saturated the plan with our thoughts. Love to hear it. That's great.
I definitely was gonna say thanks for saying that, Andrew. I don't know if you wrote some things like that on the slides, but I was trying to make the stars blink on those. I said the exact same thing to them. I'm like, enough meetings about having meetings about having meetings. Let's do it. Let's get it done.
That's the next step, is figuring out how to get it done for sure. Anything else?
I just added a little community announcement. I don't know if you all are aware of the RVA Environmental Film Festival. It's hard to know everything that's going on, but the movie tonight is called Gather. And it's adjacent to this group, I guess. It's about Native American food sovereignty. But if you need a break and just want to take some time out and relax with a great movie, that's there. And the folks doing the RVA Environmental Film Festival are awesome. So, you know, I think we all deserve a movie after all this hard work.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll definitely be checking that out. Okay, well, certainly want to give you guys your day back. So thank you so much for participating. I can't thank you enough for your time and thought. So I'll stay on if anyone wants to stick around and ask me any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.